Man Visible and Invisible by C.W. Leadbeater. Chapter 18. More Permanent Conditions. We have endeavored to illustrate the immediate effect of some of the sudden emotions which affect the outer vehicles of man, and to explain that, quickly as they pass, they are not without permanent results to the soul within. It remains for us to describe the way in which certain dispositions or types of character manifest themselves, so that it may be seen to what extent each of these modifies the progress of man upon his upward path. There is one influence, however, which produces a considerable result in the lives of most men, which does not exactly belong to either of these categories. It is often sudden in its advent, and in most cases it is certainly not lifelong in its duration. But it still does not fade away so rapidly as those which we have been considering. Nevertheless, in the life of such a man as imaged in plates 8, 9, and 10, it is usually the main event. Indeed, it is very frequently the one really bright spot in an existence which is otherwise monotonous, sordid, and selfish. The only occasion on which such a personality is lifted temporarily out of himself and lives for a while on an altogether higher level. This sudden elevation comes to the person who, as is commonly called, falls in love. Into a life cramped and limited there suddenly shines a gleam from above, and the divine spark within glows brighter in response. Later, a man may lose it again and descend once more into the murky light of common day. Yet nothing can take away from him the experience and the glory of the higher life. Has been to some extent revealed. He has at least passed through a phase when, for a longer or a shorter period, self was dethroned, and another entity occupied the first place in his world. And thus he learns for the first time one of the most valuable lessons in the whole course of his evolution. It will be eons before that lesson is perfectly assimilated. Yet even this first glimpse of it is an enormous importance to the ego, and its effect on the astral body is worthy of special notice. The transformation is unexpected and complete, as will be seen by comparing plates 10 with plate 15. The two bodies could not be recognized as belonging to the same person. So extraordinary is the alteration. It will be seen that certain qualities have altogether disappeared for the time, and that others have been enormously increased, and that their relative positions have considerably changed. Selfishness, deceit, and avarice have vanished, and the lowest part of the oval is now filled with a large development of animal passions. The green of adaptability has been replaced by the peculiar brownish green of jealousy, and the extreme activity of this feeling is shown by the bright scarlet flashes of anger which permeate it. But the undesirable changes are more than counterbalanced by the splendid band of crimson which fills so large a part of the oval. This is, for the first time, a dominant characteristic, and the whole astral body glows with its light. Under its influence, the general muddiness of the ordinary body has disappeared, and the hues are all brilliant and clearly marked, good and bad alike. It is an intensification of the life in various directions. It will be noticed that the blue of devotion is also distinctly improved, and even so much has the nature been temporarily elevated. A touch of pale violet appears at the summit of the ovoid, indicating a capacity of response to a really high and unselfish ideal. The yellow of intellect, however, has entirely vanished, for the time, which I suppose would be considered by the cynical as characteristic of the condition. It seems scarcely possible that after all this brilliant development, the man should sink back again into the condition indicated in Plate 10. Yet, in the majority of cases, this is what occurs, though naturally the amount of crimson has considerably augmented, and it is clearer in hue than before. This experience of being in love is assuredly a valuable one for the ego, and gives him a definite forward impulse, even though there may be associated with it much that is undesirable. The intensely strong and unselfish affection often felt by children for those somewhat older than themselves is a very powerful factor in their progress, since it is usually an unmixed benefit, free from all associations connected with the lower animal nature, even though such affection may seem transitory and may change its object more than once. As the years roll by, it is nevertheless very real while it lasts, and it serves a noble purpose in preparing the vehicle to respond more readily to the stronger vibrations which are yet in the future, just as the unset blossom of the fruit tree, which seems to come to nothing in reality, has a function, since it not only looks exceedingly beautiful at the time, but also helps draw up the sap for the fruit that is to come. This next section is called the irritable man. We now turn to the consideration of the manner in which certain special types of character exhibit themselves in the bodies of the man. The case of the irritable man is a good specimen of these. His astral body will usually show a broad band of scarlet as one of his prominent features, as we see in Plate 16. But what especially differentiates him from other men is the presence in all parts of the astral body of little floating specks of scarlet, somewhat like notes of exclamation. These are the result of little accessions of vexation at the small worries which are constantly occurring in ordinary life. Every time any little trifle goes wrong, when his coffee is cold, when he misses his train, or when the baby upsets the ink bottle, the irascible man gives vent to an impatient or angry exclamation, and a tiny scarlet flash shows the uncontrolled feeling. In some cases, these little messengers of undisciplined temper fly outward toward the person who is supposed to be responsible for whatever has gone wrong, but in many others they simply remain floating within him, suspended in the matter of the astral body, and presenting the appearance shown in our illustration. These spots gradually fade away, but their places are taken by others, for the irritable man is never at a loss for subjects of annoyance. The next part is called the miser. Another striking but happily less common spectacle is that which is imaged for us in Plate 17. The background differs somewhat from the ordinary astral body, for there is a total absence of devotion and far less than the normal proportion of affection. Avarice, selfishness, deceit, and adaptability, or perhaps rather cunning, are all intensified, but on the other hand, there is very little sensuality. The most remarkable characteristic, however, is to be seen in the curious series of parallel horizontal lines, which bar the oval and give the impression that the man is confined within a cage. These bars are of a deep brown color, almost burnt sienna, level and clearly marked as to their upper edge, but shading off into a sort of cloud below. This is an illustration of a confirmed miser. And naturally, so extreme a case is not very common, but a large number of people seem to have some of the elements of the miser in their nature, and show them by intensification of the color of avarice and by 1 or 2 such bars in the upper part of the astral body. Though few are so completely confined as is this specimen, it is obvious that this man has shut himself away from the world, that vibrations from without cannot readily affect him. Probably in this way he escapes some of the ordinary temptations of life, but he also makes himself impervious to love and sympathy from his friends and to all the higher religious feelings. Above all, his prison bars prevent the passage of vibrations outward as well as inward, and he himself can pour out neither affection nor devotion. He is wrapped absolutely in his own selfishness, and is doing no good to any human being, and while that is his condition, he can make no progress. This vice of avarice seems to have the effect of completely arresting development for the time, and it's difficult to shake off when once it has firmly gained a hold upon the personality. And this next part is called deep depression. The astral body, shown in plate 18, is in many ways similar to the last. Here, however, we have dull gray lines instead of the brown, and the whole effect is indescribably gloomy and depressing to the observer. It does not seem that in this case any qualities are necessarily absent. We have simply the ordinary colors of the body as a background, but all are veiled by these heavy sweeping lines. Our picture represents a person during a period of extreme depression, when he is utterly isolated, as was the miser. And naturally, there are very many intermediate stages between this and the healthy astral body. A man may have only a few bars of depression, and even they may be but transient, or in slighter and less persistent cases, the heavy cloud may hardly have time to arrange itself in lines at all. Yet there are too many who yield themselves to these feelings and allow the fog of despair to close around them until all the world looks black, not realizing that in so doing they are not only seriously delaying their own evolution and losing manifold opportunities, but are also causing unnecessary suffering and injury to all those near him. No psychic condition is more infectious than this feeling of depression. Its vibrations radiate in all directions and introduce their slackening, deadening effects into every astral body within reach, whether the ego to which that astral body belongs is in incarnation or not. The man who gives way to his despondency is thus a nuisance and a danger alike to the living and the dead, for in these days of overstrain and nervous worry, most people find it very difficult to resist the contagion of these funereal vibrations. The only man who is proof against such dire influences is he who understands something of the purpose of life, who regards it from the philosophical and common sense standpoint. Fortunately, good influences can be spread abroad just as readily as evil ones, and the man who is wise enough to be happy will become a center of happiness for others, a veritable sun, shedding light and joy on all around him, and to this extent acting as a fellow worker together with God, who is the source of all joy. In this way, we may all help to break these gloomy bars of depression and set the soul within them free in the glorious sunlight of divine love. And this next part is called the devotional type. It will be useful for us to close our list of special cases among astral bodies by examining two very distinct types, from the comparison of which a good deal may be learned. The first of these is illustrated in plate 19, and we may call him the devotional man. His characteristics present themselves through the medium of his colors, and we see that he possesses the faint touch of violet, which implies the possibility of his response to the presentment of a high ideal. His most prominent feature is the unusual development of the blue, showing strong religious feeling, but unfortunately, only a very small proportion of this is the pure light blue of unselfish devotion, the majority being of a dark and somewhat muddy hue, suggesting an admixture of a good deal of desire for personal gain. The very small portion of yellow tells us that he has very little intelligence to direct his devotion into reasonable channels, or to save him from degenerating into senseless bigotry. He has a fair proportion of affection and adaptability, though not of a very high order. But the amount of sensuality manifested is much above average, and deceit and selfishness are also very prominent. It is a remarkable fact that extreme sensuality and the devotional temperament are so frequently seen in association. It would suggest that there must be some hidden connection between them, or it may be simply that both are characteristic of a man who lives chiefly in his feelings and is governed by them instead of trying to control them by reason. Another point to which attention should be paid is the irregularity in the distribution of the colors and the vagueness of their outline. They all melt into one another, and there are no clear lines of demarcation anywhere. This also is very expressive of the vagueness of the devotional man's conceptions. It will be understood that in this case, as in all the others in this chapter, we are dealing merely with the variance of the ordinary person. Consequently, this is the astral person of an ordinary and non-intellectual religious man, not in the least that of a developed religious man whose devotion is evoked by full comprehension and guided by reason. And this next section and last section is called the scientific type. The observer can hardly fail to be struck by the contrast between the body illustrated in Plate 20 and that which was just described. In Plate 19, we see that the principal features are devotion of a sort and sensuality, and a very small modicum of intellect is shown. In Plate 20, we have no devotion at all, and far less than the average amount of sensuality, but the intellect is developed to a very abnormal degree. Affection and adaptability are both somewhat small in quantity and poor in quality, being apparently overshadowed by the intellectual development, as the man is not yet sufficiently advanced to possess all these qualities, equally in their highest forms. There is a good deal of selfishness and avarice, and a certain capability of jealousy is also apparent. But the great feature of this man is a large proportion of golden yellow, showing a well-developed intelligence directed principally to the attainment of knowledge. A huge cone of bright orange, rising in the midst of it, indicates the presence of much pride and ambition in connection with that knowledge. But still, the shade of the yellow precludes the idea that the intellect is debased to merely selfish ends. It should be noticed that the scientific and orderly habit of mind has a distinct influence upon the arrangement of the astral colors. They tend to fall into regular bands, and the lines of demarcation between them are decidedly more definite than in the previous illustration. It is evident that the bodies pictured in Plate 19 and 20 give us examples of two varieties of unequal development, and while each has its good points, each also has decided disadvantages. We shall now proceed to the consideration of the vehicles of the more developed man, who possesses all these various qualities to a much greater extent, but has them well balanced, so that each supports and strengthens the other, instead of dominating or stifling it.